To order. Welcome to meeting number 36 of the House of Commons Special Committee on the Canada People's Republic of China relationship. Pursuant to the order of reference of May 16, 2022, the committee is meeting on its study of the Canada People's Republic of China relations. Substitute members for today. Well, we have Mr. Cooper subbing in for Ms. Lantzman. I'm sure the shoes are killing you. And we also have MP Ellis substituting for MP Seaback, MP Nakvi for MP Oliphant. Who else are we missing? Everybody else looks...
Mr. Desjardins.
Oh, and Mr. Desjardins in
Ms.
for Ms. McPherson. Good to have you join us. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking, and for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of the screen of either Floor, English, or French, and for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. Kirk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. We appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Per the motion adopted on March 26, 2024, we're hearing testimonies in relation to the matters revealed in the Winnipeg lab documents. I'd now like to welcome the Honourable Mark Holland, Minister of Health, and the following officials from the Department of Health: Nadine Huggins, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Security Officer, Corporate Services Branch; and from the Public Agency of Canada, Heather Jeffrey, President, and Dr. Guillaume Paulquin, Vice President, National Microbiology Laboratory, by video conference. And we see everybody present. Minister Holland, you may commence with a 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate the committee giving me the opportunity to answer your questions and to make some brief opening remarks, if I could. Let me start by saying that the action of the two employees, former employees at the National Microbiology Laboratory, are reprehensible and are deeply disturbing. That two Canadian citizens, two eminent scientists who are well known throughout North America for their contributions to in the field of therapeutics and vaccines and virology, lied, misrepresented themselves. These were employees who were hired in 2003 and 2006, respectively, and who had made great contributions outside of this. But appropriately, the Public Health Agency identified. They were fired, and they are now the subject of investigation. The second thing I'd like to say at the onset, if I could, Mr. Chair, is just to recognize the extraordinary world-class work done by the National Microbiology Laboratory. Its surveillance work in the area of infectious disease, in emergency outbreak preparedness and response, training, research, and development helps keep Canadians safe. We're extraordinarily lucky to have some of the greatest scientists in the world working in that facility. Their work is absolutely critical to the continuing evolving health environment that we're in that necessitates international cooperation. I would also recognize that in the past 5-6 years, not only have we had a global pandemic, but that the threat environment that we live in is different. Countries such as China are implicating themselves in our domestic processes in a way that would have been unimaginable just 5 years ago. And as such, we have to respond, and are, and I'm happy to talk about some of those responses. But I think it's important context, Mr. Chair, if I could, to talk about how we got here today. I was a member of the Public Safety and National Security Committee. I was its vice chair. And we had an opportunity going back in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2011 to say to the government of the day, the then Conservative government, that the recommendations of Justice Iacobucci and Justice O'Connor were essential. And one of the main recommendations of both of those processes was to have a committee of parliamentarians that would have the opportunity to look at all documents. It's important to note in this particular case that the employees who were hired in 2003 and 2006, that the only thing that would be different today, if there hadn't have been a Liberal government, is we wouldn't be having this meeting and you wouldn't see the documents. The Conservative government of the day refused to allow parliamentary oversight. In 2021, when this matter was before the House of Commons, there was a battle in Parliament, a disagreement about how these documents should be looked at. At the time, the offer was made for the NSICOP committee to be given an opportunity to take a look at this so that parliamentarians of every political party would have the opportunity to take a look at the documents in their totality without redactions. And the comment was made after the 2021 election to me, when I was then the House Leader, that there was concern that the opposition parties had that would mean that if they disagreed with redactions, that they had no challenge function to those redactions, and I think appropriately they asked for the ability to challenge redactions. So at that point in time, as House Leader, I worked with other parties. Initially, it was just the Democratic Party. Eventually, many months later, the Conservatives and the Bloc also joined for us to have an ad hoc process of independent arbiters who were able to look at the documents and where redactions, there was disagreement on them, they could make a decision about what should or shouldn't be released. That committee and the independent panel of arbiters appropriately was asked to err on the side of public disclosure and to make sure that maximum public view into the documents would be made available, and that's precisely what occurred. We're not just talking here about national security of these redactions. The Public Health Agency also obviously has to consider confidential employee information. Quite rightfully, in this case, the normal protections around confidentiality of employee information was waived, given the serious security breach that these two Canadian citizens engaged in. And that's why we're here today. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to take questions of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Minister Holland. We'll begin with Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. Thank you to the officials who are here. Minister, 3 weeks ago when you appeared before the Health Committee and were asked about the massive national security breach at the Winnipeg lab, you stated that PHAC at all material times acted in, quote-unquote, the highest order, and that with respect to accountability, no one at PHAC will be fired. Do you stand by that?
Well, in the first order, these two employees were fired. They were held to account for their actions and for the lies that they told. But I believe, as I stated then, I will state now, that the Public Health Agency acted appropriately throughout that process in responding to those lies and that misinformation.
Thank you, and no one else will be fired, correct?
I am not aware of anybody else being fired. The people who are responsible for engaging in that activity have been fired.
So I want to ask you some questions about decisions that PHAC made surrounding this massive national security failure, and Canadians can judge themselves whether PHAC acted in the highest order, as you stated 3 weeks ago before the Health Committee. First, why in October 2018 did PHAC enter into a material transfer agreement with the Wuhan Institute of Virology to transfer from the Winnipeg lab Ebola and Hennepin, two of the most deadly pathogens? Why did that happen?
Well, in 2018, we were working collaboratively with China on developing therapies and interventions with respect to Ebola. It is a serious global pathogen, and that the efforts at that point in time were to collaborate with China in a partnership to take action with respect to Ebola.
Minister, I asked you a question. I'm going to build on it. October 2018 is significant. This material transfer agreement was initiated by none other than Dr. Chu, one of the two scientists. In October 2018, at the time that that material transfer agreement was entered into, PHAC was already aware that Dr. Chu was named on a Chinese patent, which was highly suspicious and had been flagged to CSIS by the head of the Winnipeg lab as a potential national security threat. And so why in the world, with that knowledge, would PHAC transfer deadly, dangerous pathogens to Wuhan at the request of a scientist that PHAC knew at that time was a potential national security risk?
Well, in the fall, as you know, in the fall of 2018 is when this matter was first flagged as concern, and we have due process. The transfer that you're talking about was done in the full knowledge and with the full cooperation of the Public Health Agency in the interest of advancing the protection of our species against the infectious disease of Ebola. And at that point in time, the effort, because Ebola doesn't know boundaries, the effort was to work collaboratively with China and other countries. It is deeply disturbing, obviously.
Order, Chair, point of order. This is the third time now that Mr. Cooper has interrupted the minister who's here as a witness. I think he's answering in good faith. I think that Mr. Cooper is asking questions, which he's perfectly entitled to. I would just ask, Mr. Chair, that the usual, the typical, the collegial back and forth that we would expect here at committee be allowed to take place rather than interruptions, because I'm trying to get a sense of the answers as well, and interruptions get in the way of that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Fragasatis. I think that Minister Holland, you should do your best to keep your answers concise, given that there is limited time for questions. Mr. Cooper, allow the minister to complete his answers. Go ahead, and we've stopped the clock, so
okay.
You're good to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, you are right that it was in the fall of 2018 that red flags were first raised about these two scientists. And a preliminary investigation wasn't undertaken until December of 2018. That's months after the first red flags were raised, and in the interim, a material transfer agreement was signed with Wuhan at the request of one of those scientists who was deemed to be a potential national security threat. Why did it take so long to launch a preliminary investigation? 4 months? That's a long time.
Yeah, so in this instance, the nature of that patent and the reason why that patent hadn't been disclosed was being investigated, and there is due process. I would say that it is indeed sad for the world that we are no longer able to cooperate closely with countries with respect to deadly pathogens that represent a clear and present threat to the human race. The fact that there are countries that are engaging in activities that would endanger not only our country but all human beings is profoundly disturbing.
Minister, and then the report, a preliminary fact-finding report, is issued on March 23rd, 2019, that identified that the two scientists had engaged in multiple security and intellectual property breaches, and that they had engaged in unauthorized transfers, including to Wuhan, and had engaged in unauthorized research collaboration with the Beijing regime, including the People's Liberation Army. And what did PHAC do next? PHAC actually then transferred Ebola and Hennepin to Wuhan.
Well, you're making a connection between two completely separate things. In the first order, the transferring and working with China at that point in time to try to protect our species from Ebola was something that we were doing earnestly with the belief that China shared our desire to protect human beings from a deadly pathogen. In the second order, when you're talking about the individuals, the scientists who were fired, remember, these were individuals who were hired in 2003 and 2006. They are published throughout North America. They are eminent scientists. They are Canadians. They are Canadian citizens.
And not only that,
Sir, if I could finish, Mr. Chair, if I could be given a floor to bit, I think it's a key point.
But it took another 3.5 months until July 5th, 2019, before the two scientists were finally marched out of the Winnipeg lab. Scientists that by March had been identified as working with the People's Liberation Army. This is Canada's highest security lab. Is that really an instance of PHAC acting on the highest order, as you said? Is that Mark Holland's definition of PHAC acting on the highest order?
Mr. Cooper, you are over time, but I will give the minister an opportunity to respond.
Due process is incredibly important, Mr. Chairman. These individuals had worked with the Public Health Agency. One was hired in 2003, one was hired in 2006. They were published and renowned across North America for their work in vaccines, virology, and in therapy. They were seen as being leaders in helping to save lives. If you are making an accusation against somebody and these people's careers rightfully are destroyed, before you destroy somebody's career, they are entitled to due process.
Minister,
Due
you say
process
they're
is important
eminent
in this
scientists
country.
or eminent
Mr.
spies.
Cooper, I'm sorry, your time has expired. Again, when we speak over each other, it makes it very difficult for our interpreters to do their job. Okay, we'll now go to Mr. Franciscatos for 6 minutes or less.
That's Mr. Nakviak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And Minister, welcome to this committee. And I want to pick up the conversation where Mr. Cooper left it, because I think he's throwing quite a few dates and perhaps muddling the facts. Canada, I'm assuming, have had a long-term relationship in working along with China and other countries when it comes to finding a cure for deadly pathogens, as you put it, and other matters. Can you walk us through the kind of relationships, kind of arrangements and agreements that Canada, through Public Health Agency of Canada, goes through and develops with other countries like China?
Well, the collaborations that we engage in internationally are critically important to protecting our population and to protecting human beings all across the world. As I mentioned, pathogens don't know international boundaries, and they certainly aren't interested in politics. And so the ability to share best practices, science, the latest evidence of what actions we can take, be it in therapies or be it in vaccines, is critically important. And so where new information arises, we want those partnerships. And I think it's deeply tragic, frankly, that the relationship with China deteriorated to such that we can't collaborate on these issues any longer. It is unfathomable that a country would place its interest as a nation ahead of the interests of the health of our species, and that's what we encountered here. And so we're in a very different place than we were 5 years ago, and that's deeply tragic. That is separate and apart, and I think we have to be very careful because there's an attempt to conflate these things with the action of Canadian citizens who lied. You know, were in their jobs and completely misrepresented themselves to the Public Health Agency. That's reprehensible. They were rightfully fired. They're rightfully subject to investigation, and that is certainly a very serious matter. But we have to be careful, I think, in the characterization of that, not to conflate things.
So obviously what happened in 2018 and 19 in terms of these two particular scientists, and they essentially lying to the employer, the National Microbiology Laboratory. Can you walk us through what steps have been taken by the National Microbiology Laboratory to ensure that the safety and security is enhanced, and so that what happened in 2018-19 could not happen again?
Yeah, I thank you for that question. And I think, look, anytime somebody misrepresents themselves and engages in behavior of this nature, you learn. And certainly the threat environment for Canada has changed over the last 5 years. So there have been really critical actions that I can go into more detail. I know we don't have a lot of time, but with respect to physical security, facility access, employee communication, engagement, technology, partnership and research affiliations, governance oversight, this is a process of continual improvement. And, when it comes to national safety, unfortunately, we don't always, in fact, most often don't share the same values as some of our adversaries. And they're willing to go places and do things that are unimaginable to us. I think it would have been unimaginable that a country like China would have been willing to, in this instance, potentially use pathogens that have a threat to humanity in a way that would advance their geopolitical agenda. That's no longer unimaginable. And so that changes how you respond. And so looking at how employees communicate and whether, and even when they're incredibly eminent, well-published scientists who are Canadian citizens, recognizing that we have to dig more and ask more questions. And in the past, that would have been deeply insulting, I think, to scientists. Now, in the light of this, scientists understand that they can't be taken at their word, that we have to question the relationships they have and probe into their lives in a way that would have seemed entirely inappropriate and crazy before. But that's the advantage of hindsight. When somebody does something that is unthinkable, then it changes your frame and it changes your disposition. And then we as a society have to accept something that's more invasive. And that's certainly true for scientists today.
Thank you. How much time do I have left, Chair?
1 minute.
1 minute. Perhaps in a minute, if I can ask the officials if they can outline what kind of process that both Public Health Agency of Canada and the National Microbiology Laboratory went through in terms of enhancing their safety and security protocols after 2018-19.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can respond to that question. So in addition to the enhanced physical security access control measures, all policies at the National Microbiology Lab and for the agency were revised. These are secret level facilities requiring clearances, as well as clearances under the Human Pathogens and Toxins Act. There is continual training and review of our guard services as well as our personnel. We have strengthened protocols for deliveries and shipping and receiving, including mandatory controls around documentation and verification of infectious materials. There is requirements for material transfer agreements and collaborative research agreements, enforcement of their use, and comprehensive threat and risk assessments for the physical and IT environments have been undertaken to ensure that all of our security measures are complete and up to date. In addition, we have updated our policy on affiliations and our collaborations with academic, research, and healthcare organizations, and we have a new student hiring policy with additional controls. These are designed to respond to the new threat environment that we face.
Thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. We have finished with Mr. Naqvi's time. We'll now go to Monsieur Bergeron for 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today. Well, listen, I listened to your answers to Mr. Cooper's questions, and I found that they were quite naive when you said that you still believed that the Chinese authorities attributed to deathly viruses such as Ebola the same consideration that we would have towards them, i.e. that we need to protect humanity. Those remarks strike me as all the more naive, given that in an article of the 29th of February that was published on the Radio-Canada website, you stated that the influence of China on Canada's scientific community was not as well known as it is today. However, in an article published in the Journal de Montréal on the 29th of January 2024, it states that in 2010, CSIS published a report explaining the growth of the economic power of China, its new aggressive behaviour in recruiting foreign officers, which would suggest that the resources were inadequate when it came to intelligence. In other words, for the past 20 years, CSIS has been alerting government authorities to the fact that the People's Republic of China is showing itself to be increasingly aggressive and is intensifying its intelligence gathering activities, particularly when it comes to technological research and advancements from a biomedical standpoint. So why is it that you would claim that Chinese influence was not as well known back then as it is today? Why say that? Well, right off the bat, public safety is such a complicated issue. There's so many dimensions to it, especially when it comes to a virus that threatens the general population. Of course, the government is going to do its utmost to protect the public. It's going to try to act collaboratively and look for solutions such that if there are solutions available, well, then those will be used. And that's what we tried to do in the first instance. We tried to work with all scientific communities across the world in a quest for solutions. That was fundamental. If there were to be an incident, of tragic proportions in the future, there will be other questions that are raised at that time. What did the government do to protect the public? What did the government do in terms of looking for solutions collaboratively? So it is important to, in the first instance, seek to act collaboratively to the extent possible. Now, only 5 years ago, the world was a different place. And back then, well, obviously there were issues with China. That can't be denied. But to my mind, it's shocking to think that a country might play games with a deadly virus for geopolitical reasons. That is a different situation. It's clear to me. And as a health minister, there are a lot of conflicting objectives and priorities. There are a lot of threats on the horizon at the same time, and that's of great concern to me. So we need to cooperate with all those countries that seem to be willing to cooperate with us. It's terrible that a country that is big as China is not collaborative, that we cannot work with China. There are so many wonderful, incredible scientists in China who come up with wonderful solutions, and they represent a huge amount of potential both for Canada and Canadians. It is just so sad that we've had this interaction with China come to a screeching halt. This has had an impact not just in Canada but for the whole world. Well, we need to acknowledge that that concern that you have, that is to cooperate with all countries that might be in a position to prevent the proliferation of viruses that might be catastrophic and deadly for humanity. That is a praiseworthy objective. I acknowledge that. However, given that for the past 20 years, CSIS, in fact, alerted the Canadian government that there was a real issue when it came to scientific espionage being perpetrated by the People's Republic of China. Don't you think that it was imprudent of us to continue to share our secrets, our scientific information and intelligence with scientists who shared these wantonly with the People's Republic of China? Response. Well, when a country threatens information, well, there's always a threat that a country might use that information for their economic advantage. That's one kind of risk that we run, one kind of threat. But it's far less important than a threat to our national security and safety, of course. So if you cast your mind back 5 years, at that stage of the game, it was possible that Chinese scientists would use that information for their economic advantage and gain, but that didn't have huge ramifications. But the fact that they instead weaponized this virus as a threat to the global population, well, that's a different kettle of fish. And as I've previously said, this is so unfortunate that, you've got 1 billion people in China and we can no longer cooperate with them when it comes to virology. That's really a different kettle of fish, as I said. Thank you.
We'll now go to Mr. Desjardins for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Minister for being present on a very important piece of work because it concerns, I think, something most Canadians are concerned about, the safety and security not only of our country but of our information. And in an age of digital technology where companies and countries are both participating in an information exchange but also in withholding of information, it's really the kind of, to put it in terms of I guess, bad actors, it could be a battlefield. And in this particular instance, I think Canadians are concerned that should we find ourselves on a quote-unquote informational battlefield, that we would be disadvantaged by the reality of the knowledge that is being seen within, I think, this very troubling case. And I think, Minister, you alluded to the fact that it's important that there be accountability. The two individuals that, of course, did this are no longer there. But, of course, what isn't known is how cooperative their other officials could have been, or other persons or other personnel. What information have you reviewed, or your ministry reviewed, maybe in coordination with CSIS, the safety and security of other persons within our health agency, particularly within the work of information science technology of PHAC?
Well, I think let's step. Thank you so much for the question. I think if you step back and ask the question, I hope everybody gets an opportunity to visit the National Microbiology Laboratory and meet the scientists who are there, who are on the front lines of really looking at potential nightmare scenarios. I mean, COVID was bad, but it could have been so very much worse. And in so many instances, we're very lucky as a population that we didn't have a pathogen with a much higher mortality rate. That remains an eminent risk for our population at any given time. So we charge that the Public Health Agency and the National Microbiology Laboratory with finding solutions to nightmare scenarios and to cooperate and listen to scientists and engage wherever possible, because God forbid anything ever happens. People are going to ask, what did you do to find an answer? And as I said, when you take 1 billion people off the planet and you no longer can cooperate with hundreds of thousands of scientists who themselves are leading in the area of virology and finding solutions, that is a terribly tragic day for humanity. And so I would say that when I look at it, and I would encourage you to look at it too, that the threats that the Public Health Agency is trying to navigate, think about this. These were employees engaged
Sorry, Minister,
in 2000.
just the timing is
Sure.
really
Yeah,
short.
no, let's go ahead.
Just back to the question on, have you reviewed or have you met with CSIS to review existing personnel and agency, whether or not the security clearances are in fact appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not responsible for that, right? I mean, I think that the
So you
Public
haven't
Health
met with them,
Agency,
or?
I would not meet with CSIS. It would be up in terms of security reviews of employees. I would turn over to the officials, to Madam Jeffrey, if I
Sure,
could,
please.
because that would be on her side of the fence.
Ms. Jeffrey?
So I note that in the first instance, this situation came to light in these cases as a result of a security awareness briefing provided by the Canadian Security Intelligence Service in regard to the threats against Canadian research and the potential vulnerability of Canadian scientists to pressure, and that awareness raising continues, regular meetings with our security services and ongoing reviews. And I would note that the RCMP investigation into these cases remains ongoing, as they have said publicly. So that those contacts have been regularized and are constant and ongoing, as is appropriate given the nature of the ongoing evolving risk situation.
No, thank you for that. To get to the crux of the issue, I think it's important that PHAC and other agencies within the government have security processes for really important information like this. It is a bit concerning to know that the CSIS was the only agent at this point that identified this information vulnerability prior to PHAC. You know, I believe that Canadians expect an agency that has an immense amount of information, particularly personal information of individuals, that there be some kind of security oversight internal to the ministry. I understand that this, could have largely been prevented, I think, by ways of the recent changes that you've discussed, Minister, publicly. Those changes, of course, could have been made much sooner, I believe, that could have reduced some of the risk that's present to this case. One quick answer. If you could do this whole thing again, would you have released the documents sooner?
So no, because the process by which we released the documents was incredibly important. And maybe if I could rest on this moment for a second. National security is not the only issue present here. There's also considerations of protecting employee privacy. And if you're going to waive that, I mean, the people who serve in the public service have the right, as in any job, by the way. I was head of Heart and Stroke. We let people go. And sometimes it was painful because they would have a story of why they were let go that was completely inaccurate. But I wasn't allowed to comment. Right? And the reason I'm not allowed to comment is because employee confidentiality is extremely important. So to waive that is a big deal. And I think when we waive it, I think we have to think through these issues. What I liked about this process was that there was a weakness identified in NSI COP in terms of challenging redactions. And we were able to create a process in the ad hoc committee that allowed those through an independent arbiter to be released with maximum transparency while protecting the partnerships we have, their Five Eye partners, to make sure that employee information information and national security is protected. And what I think is worth doing.
Do you think that's impacted, however, our credibility to our allies in NATO and the Five Eyes, for example?
I think that the fact that we were so cautious with dealing with this issue and that we worked through a way of both ensuring transparency and public interest and making sure that we still maintained our commitments to protect
Well, I don't know if we did
our
that, though,
processes.
because it was an information breach, right?
Well, there's two different questions. If you're talking about, and maybe I misunderstood your question, I apologize. I thought your question was how we handled the release of the documents.
That was the first question. The
Right.
second
And
question
so
was
if the
related to
second
the
question
impacts
is,
to our
I think
allies.
that look, just think, and I think this is bear thinking about. These were employees who were long-term employees, 2003, 2006.
I think that's why it's
Published-
concerning, though,
Well, it
Minister.
is for me too. I mean, these are Canadian citizens,
But has it
eminent
impacted our
scientists.
allies?
Yeah, I think
know that we have-
Yes, it has, and it has in this way.
Yes,
It
gentlemen,
would-
I
it
need
would-
to intervene because Mr. Desjardins' time has
Thank you, Chair.
expired. And it's time to go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The identification of 2 patents registered in China, was that the first red flag that went up about Dr. Chu?
That's correct.
And can you tell us why Dr. Matthew Gilmore suddenly resigned 8 weeks into a global pandemic in May of 2020, and why Tina Nemianovsky, the president of the Public Health Agency of Canada, suddenly resigned on a Friday afternoon of September 2020?
I don't know that I'm in a position to be able to comment on that, Madam Jeffries.
I would say that both of those, it's not really appropriate for us to comment, and I think they both reflected they resigned for personal reasons, not
Okay, so
associated with this issue.
Not associated with this issue at all? Okay.
I'm not privy to their reasons, but that was
But
what.
you know that they resigned for personal reasons? That's what you're telling
Perhaps if I could respond. I mean, I think one of the challenges, and I got into it earlier, anytime we're talking about information with respect to
I know what you're
an
gonna say,
employee, we have to be very, very
With respect,
careful.
you are wrong in that. The Privacy Act exempts parliamentary committees and other judicial proceedings from the terms of the Privacy Act. That's stated in the opening clauses of that act, which is an act of parliament. So we are exempt from the provisions of the Privacy Act when we're asking questions in respect of employees of the Government of Canada. We went through that in the previous parliament on this very committee, actually, when we were asking for these documents. But if you don't know the reasons why they resigned, that's fine. I'm just asking the questions. So I take it that you
Madam
don't.
Jeffrey responded to the fullest extent
Okay,
that I can
thank you.
provide her an answer.
Thank you. The next question I have is there any collaboration between the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg and entities in the PRC presently?
No.
Okay. Are there any scientists working for the Government of Canada that are participating in the 1,000 Talents program?
I would refer to Madam Jeffrey to make sure that I'm not.
So in this case is the only one that I'm aware of where our scientists are participating in this program, and I'd refer you to our security services for information. This was an undeclared collaboration.
That's right. And
it's in the
as
document.
you're correct, the Government of Canada stumbled upon it. Has there been a review or a proactive request on part of the management within the Government of Canada to ensure that all government scientists are complying with the policies of the government and declaring their participation in the 1,000 Talents program?
Yeah, I mean, look, there had to be, and I think it's deeply unfortunate. You have, again, these are Canadian citizens, longtime employees, well-published, eminent scientists, known well throughout North America, lying to the Public Health Agency. That changed things materially. And so there was so at that point in time, you're now having to ask questions and dig into people's backgrounds in a way that would have been seen as invasive and inappropriate before.
Sure. So just to clarify, there is no collaboration presently going on between the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg and entities and individuals in the People's Republic of China. Is that?
That is correct. And
Okay,
I would
thank
say,
you.
yeah,
Thank you
and I
for-
would say just up further to the other point, there's a requirement, and there always has been a requirement to declare any affiliations or outside work.
Agreed.
And I mean, that's one of the reasons these people were fired. They lied
Yes,
about that.
Agreed. Thank you. A question about non-Canadian citizens. The documents that we received revealed that non-Canadian citizens, specifically PRC nationals, were given access to the lab. So my first question is, who in public health, the Department of Public Health, the Department of Health Canada, or in the Public Health Agency of Canada, who is responsible for granting security clearances at the NML in Winnipeg?
I'll go to Madam Jeffrey.
So the security screening process begins with reliability status checks that are conducted by the security department of the agency, then referred to the RCMP and to the Security Intelligence Service for secret clearances.
But CSIS doesn't grant clearance. CSIS and the RCMP and others provide advice, but there is an individual within either Health Canada or PIAC that grants the clearance. Who is that individual?
It's granted by the security department of the public health agency.
Yeah, so departmental security officer or some similar titled person. So why did they grant access to PRC nationals for a level 4 lab, which is contrary to government policy?
You know, I think that the engagement, and could be correct. Go ahead, Madam Chair. Yeah.
I can say that the access of those students was through a research affiliate program with the University of Manitoba, and that those students did not have clearances under the Human Pathogens and Toxin Act, and therefore were not involved in level 3 or level 4 lab work or any of the restricted
They required
pathogens and toxins.
top-level clearance to get into the lab.
Mr. Chong, I'm sorry, your time has
Yes, they
expired.
required a security
Yeah, and just one final quick point on this. It wasn't just students.
Very quickly.
A senior technician at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, a PRC national, was also granted access to that lab, the NML lab. That was also contained in the documents. Identified as individual number 2 in the documents. So again, somebody in the department, not the 2 scientists in question, because they're not granting security clearance for their own lab. Somebody else in the department granted them security clearance, and my question is, why are they not being held responsible for that gross negligence in protecting our security?
Perhaps I can answer at the back of the next question.
Subsequently, yes, I think maybe in subsequent answers you can cover that. We'll now go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes.
Thank you for coming tonight. Did you want to answer?
I will. So go ahead and ask your question. I can put it at the end. Yeah.
All right, sure. Just to be clear, does Canada have bilateral research collaboration with the PRC's scientists?
Today, no.
Okay. So people have approached me with a number of concerns regarding the security research guidelines and the new named research organization lists. Some Canadian Chinese scientists feel uneasy, targeted, or that their careers could be limited due to having a Chinese name. They are worried about being under a cloud of suspicion. How do you balance national interest of security with the concerns of some in the Chinese community?
Well, I thank you very much for that question. I think it's an important one. It's important to distinguish the action of an individual versus making collective statements. And so, in this instance, these were 2 Canadian citizens who engaged in reprehensible actions that are reflective on them and only them. And I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about scientists or we're talking about any individual to ascribe anything other than to the people who are responsible for taking those actions. And I think it is in this geopolitical environment, it's very difficult with tensions being where they are with China to separate out the actions of the government of China versus citizens of Canada who happen to have Chinese ancestry, or for that matter, people living within China. You know, there are unbelievable numbers of wonderful Chinese scientists doing incredible work for the betterment of humanity in China now. You know, the actions of a Chinese government we cannot allow that to color our view and to create the kind of distortions that you're talking about. And we have to root that out. So I would suggest that, you know, we need to step back and really consider very carefully how we address these issues. And I always think of, you know, first principles. The first principle, everybody in this room agrees that protecting our nation from foreign interference is our top priority. that we have to protect this country. Beyond that, we have to protect democracy. That we would secondarily agree that any attack on the scientific community of this country or on the domestic affairs of this country is an attack upon all of us. Every member of Parliament is equally affected by that. And that thirdly, that the actors that are engaging in this are separate and apart from any community. They are either a government actor or individuals who are making these decisions, and we have to not view them in the context of a community. And we have to think very carefully, because we've seen historically when broad characterizations are made and we are not careful with the brush that we paint, then we hurt a lot of very innocent people. And I think we have to be very careful about that.
Ms. Jeffrey or Ms. Huggins, do you have any comments that could perhaps reassure Chinese-Canadian scientists?
I'd say that this is one of the reasons why it's very important that any allegations or indices are tested through investigation by the appropriate security agencies, and the evidence is collected through all of the means and tools available at their disposal. In this instance, we had individuals that misrepresented themselves. Those that have not done so have nothing to fear from this process, and we need the talents of all of our scientists in Canada.
And maybe I could add that, and this is one of the things that's really dangerous here, because what we don't want to have happen is for the National Microbiology Laboratory or anybody who's working in the area of virology or vaccines or therapies to start being afraid of collaborating, right? Like it is the lifeblood of scientific discovery, and that the threats that we face in terms of the potential of new pathogens is extraordinary. And that we need to, wherever possible, work with folks. And so part of the questions looking back 5 years about why you were collaborating and why you were working is because these people are earnestly trying to find solutions that save human beings, right? And it is so sad that, now these lines are having to be drawn and we're losing international partners in that. And so we can't allow further barriers to come of, innocent Canadians who have done nothing wrong, who are leaders in their field, having suspicion cast upon them, having people not collaborate with them, having their research not being listened to. We can't, in our fear of one thing, create a shadow that does incredible damage in another area. And so we have to hold that in our minds as we debate these issues.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. That's your time. We'll now go to Monsieur Bergeron for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to come back to something I mentioned a couple of moments ago when I said, despite what strikes us as apparent, we didn't seem to draw the conclusions that we perhaps should have drawn over the past 20 years vis-à-vis the Chinese and Chinese government, that we perhaps misevaluated the objective facts, if you will, the tangible facts. For example, in the case of Ms. Kwangjo Kyu, a list of research organisations was written up by the Government of Canada, a list with which she was affiliated. However, on that list, there is not, the Wuhan Virology Institute is not there, nor does it state that she applied for the 1,000 Talents program of the People's Republic of Canada. How is it that that crucial information wasn't listed on the list itself, given that she was associated with those organisations and programs? Response. Well, I understand that these people that you've referred to quite simply lied. They misrepresented themselves. It's terrible. It's completely incomprehensible to my mind that a Canadian citizen, such a well-known scientist in North America, would misrepresent both herself and information in that way. Well, if I could just ask a question, Minister, in that regard. When the list for a high-security lab like the National Microbiology Lab of Winnipeg was developed, i.e. the list of organisations that researcher was affiliated with, was that a voluntary process or was there a background check or response? No, it's not voluntary. It's mandatory. There's an obligation to clearly disclose all the work that individual is doing and has done. It's an obligation. Well, I understand what you've just said, Minister, but in a sense, you're trusting the individual's word, but you don't get the intelligence services to verify that information. Well, things are subject to change. For example, if someone is well known, like that particular individual, someone with a long-term experience with the Government of Canada and who's a citizen of Canada, well, it's the responsibility of those individuals to disclose their engagements and affiliations. But when it comes to the RCMP and CSIS, well, early on in the process, the information is verified, there is security screening, and their relationships are scrutinised. So that is part and parcel of the process. But in that community, particularly at the early stages, it is possible to lie and to create that space to propagate misinformation. And that was the case, unfortunately. We've worked so hard to ensure that all of those doors are closed.
To Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, I want to turn now to a question of opinion that is likely to form question of policy in your mind as a minister, and I think many Canadians want to understand how you think about particularly these issues as they relate to decisions of today. How important is security communication and audit and evaluation work for your department?
Oh, it was essential. It is essential, and I think that every time a nefarious actor behaves in an unthinkable way, you learn. And that certainly happened here, where the behavior of these two individuals created process improvements to ensure that similar actions couldn't be undertaken in a contemporary context.
So you'd say it's very important?
Essential. So
it's essential. Your department plan as of February 29th, 2024 indicates that you'll be cutting these three areas. In particular, as it relates to the Winnipeg incident, I think it's quite irresponsible to be making financial cuts in this area. Can you describe why your department's tabled plans to make significant cuts to these three programs?
I'm not aware of any cuts.
It's in your department plan. Have you read the departmental plan you tabled on February 29th?
Yes, I have, but I'm not aware of any cuts. Madam Jeffrey, can you?
I'd say we're not making any reductions to our security expenditures except for those related to the oversized nature of our pandemic response. Of course, our departmental estimates are coming down off that peak, but we in fact are making new investments in cybersecurity, our IT infrastructure, and our security.
So to clarify, you're saying that
because it's important. I didn't understand.
Please clarify.
So you could imagine during the pandemic, the Public Health Agency was scaled up radically to meet the demands of the pandemic.
For these areas, security, communication, and audit evaluation?
Well, for every aspect, because you could imagine the number of employees that we had was vastly larger. So, for example, if you're having to run security checks for a much larger workforce, there's going to be increased costs. You have a smaller workforce, you're going to have less need for those security. So, any reductions that are in security have nothing to do with a reduction in security. It has to do with a scaling back of workforce moving into a post-pandemic period.
So, to what level did you return it to then?
Well, we're above pre-pandemic levels, 2019 levels, and we're making continued investments to go beyond that, some of which I look forward to talking about in coming days. But we're above where we were prior to the pandemic.
And in terms of judging how you allocate resources, particular to these areas, in light of the Winnipeg incident, how do you justify the increase or not in the increase?
Well, I think the investments have been appropriate and they continue. That there is, across the spectrum of health, unbelievable needs, right? And every moment that you take from one area, you have to give to another, and there's a limit to what you can do fiscally. But I would say that the increased investments we've made in security and in protection of our facilities are extremely important, and that we will continue to make the investments needed to.
So the cuts are COVID related, though, to summarize.
Exactly, yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Ellis, the final 5 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Back in 2017, Minister, the United States raised questions about the Chinese Ministry of Defense's Academy of Military and Medical Sciences Institute of Microbiology and Epidemiology saying that they were a risk of potential biological weapon capabilities. Doesn't that fly in the face of you saying that we had a great relationship with China then?
I don't recall having said we had a great relationship. I said that there were, at that point in time, emergent concerns, certainly around the way in which China was engaging itself internationally. There were some early warning signals that things were beginning to turn in a bad way. But I would say that the management of risk, in particular when we're talking about deadly pathogens and trying to find answers, that at that moment in time, thinking that that you would use information around therapies and vaccines to try to use them for some sort of geopolitical military purpose, that was a different dimension at that moment in time.
But realistically, Minister, I mean, clearly the United States identified that they were talking about small-scale offensive biological weapons program.
Well, at that moment in
You
time,
think about it, you've talked a lot about Ebola. Wouldn't you use Ebola to do that? Wouldn't that be a great pathogen to do it?
well, no, actually, what I would say is that the
No, it wouldn't.
international
Is that what you're
cooperation.
saying?
No, you're not letting me finish my sentence. What I'm
not
saying
answering
is
the
that.
question.
What I'm attempting to answer. So what I'm saying is that international collaboration at that moment in time with respect to Ebola and any number of other pathogens that was happening at an international stage. But China represents 1 billion people. It has an enormous wealth of knowledge and information.
I don't know about China. My
And well, no,
question
but
is
they
really
were, they
don't
were.
you think
We
that
wanted
this
them
is
to be part of
dangerous?
that solution.
Don't you think that's dangerous?
I think it's dangerous to give up on collaboration with 1 billion people. Unfortunately, we had to do that
So
because the
even though
threat
we have
environment evolved.
scientists sending a potentially weaponized virus to a power that's going to make biological weapons, clearly, you think that's
Ebola.
okay. So
No,
that's
I think
okay with
Ebola exists today as a deadly pathogen.
Is that okay with you, or is it not?
Ebola exists and is easily found in there's
Well, you know what?
outbreaks all
No,
over
that's
the
not
world.
true, Minister, because
Well,
you
there
know
are
what?
outbreaks all over
They
the
didn't
world, and
have it.
China's
Excuse me.
objective was to.
Excuse me.
Well, I
They
don't
did
know
not
if you want me to
have-
answer or not.
At
I guess
the
that's up
Wuhan
to you.
Institute of Virology, they didn't have Ebola until the scientists at the National Microbiology Lab sent it to them.
There are regular
They did not have
outbreaks. There have been regular outbreaks over the last 20 years of Ebola.
Did they have it in Wuhan
well,
before it was
look,
sent from Canada or not?
What I would say is
Simple
this, which is
question.
that Ebola exists today. It has
Minister,
existed for decades
yeah,
as a deadly pathogen.
I didn't ask you
and
for
it doesn't
a
need to
lecture
be
on-
weaponized.
I didn't ask
it
you for a
already
lecture
is.
on
Point of
Ebola. On
orders.
Ebola.
Chair,
Yes, Mr. Mulkey.
I think this committee was going so well. And there were some very thoughtful back and forth that was taking place from members from all parties. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing a behavior that I saw from Mr. Ellis in HESA committee, which is highly inappropriate. And I think it's undervaluing the work that this committee is doing this on a very important topic. Pose a question, wait for the answer, get the answer. You may not like the answer, but at least have an opportunity to have a respectful discussion between the member and the speaker. And I
didn't ask for a lecture on Ebola. Thanks.
Yes, I think.
thank you for interrupting. I mean, this is just Mr. Ellis just made my point by even interrupting another member on a point of order. I mean, you come with a certain attitude, or you here to make sure that there is respectful conversation happening, as was being done by other members from his own party and other members from of the committee.
Perhaps I
Thank you.
could
I
just in
think,
10 seconds, Mr.
just-
Chair, to respond, because I should have a 10-second runway to answer the question.
Well, no, we've stopped the clock because I want Dr. Ellis to have his full 5 minutes.
Thanks very much,
just,
Chair. I
sir,
appreciate
but,
that. So,
no,
I guess
Dr.
the
Ellis,
question,
if I could please, again, this is just in the interest of our interpreters that when we talk over each other, it makes things very difficult for them. And so I would ask, in respect of them, that we keep things, orderly.
yeah, maybe if the minister would answer the question. So we'll move on from there. I guess that's the question that we'll leave. Are there other 1,000 Talents program scientists working in other Canadian labs run by the Canadian government?
None that we are aware of, no. And I can say that with respect to,
Thank
there's
you,
no
Minister.
weaponization.
No, I appreciate that answer.
Well, to the other one, if I could say,
Chair,
there's
I
no
mean,
evidence
are
of
we going to have this guy
weaponization
answer the
of.
question? I mean, once he does, then he doesn't need to keep talking. He
Well,
answered the
but
question.
I
I'm
was
quite
attempting
satisfied
to
with
answer
your
the question. I didn't get a chance to answer
So as we
before
move
because
on
you're
from
interrupting me.
then
So I
have you
don't.
done an extensive investigation to understand, are there other 10,000 Talents
That would
program
not be
scientists?
conducted by me. I would refer you to intelligence officials in terms of what
So is
actions
that
they've taken. And
investigation ongoing?
my understanding is that those officials are going to be before
Is the
this committee, and
investigation
there'll be an
ongoing now at the
opportunity.
current time, Minister?
I'm not responsible for that investigation. It wouldn't be me or my
I
department.
didn't
but
ask you if
those,
you're responsible. I asked you if there's an
I
investigation
would say
going
that
on.
those individuals will be
Yes,
appearing before
Mr.
this committee, and you can
Frank
ask the questions of them. And if you want to listen to them or give them an opportunity
No,
to have
I'm
an
asking
answer,
you a
then
question. So
Dr.
is
you're
it-
not really
Sorry,
asking
we
a
have a
question.
point of order.
You're badgering me, but that's okay.
I'm sorry to hurt your
Dr. Ellis.
feelings.
You're not hurting my
Please.
feelings. You're just not letting me get a chance to answer.
You're not answering the question. That's the biggest
Dr.
problem.
Ellis, please.
Chair, I echo what Mr. Naqvi said. The meeting was going well. These are important issues. No one's denying that. But if we're going to be serious about getting answers that allow for a genuine approach, one that prevents errors like this from happening in the future, then at least allow a civil dialogue to take place. That's all we're asking for. We're going to have a number of meetings on this very issue, it looks like. And so I don't know if Mr. Ellis is here as a permanent replacement. I don't know if he's here temporarily. But I would just ask for the member to act as an adult. I don't know how else I can put it.
All right, I think, listen, we've made our points. Let's keep things cut, neat, tidy, short questions, short answers. Get it done, okay? Dr. Ellis, you have just a tad over a minute left.
Thanks very much, Chair. So considering the what we've learned so far, which is next to nothing, what prompted the SDG of the NML to ID Drs. Chu and Chang as potential security risk as far back as 2018?
Well, as Madam Jeffrey had indicated, there was a process where there was an update that there was from CSIS on the potential of employees being approached or being attempted to get information from them and to undertake reviews. And as part of that review that came out of that process in the fall of 2018, it was found that there was a patent that had been...
Excuse me, Minister, that's not true. Because the patent issue we already established came in October. This was in August of 2018. The SDG said to CSIS, there's a problem with two scientists. They named Chu and Chang. Why?
Well, again, my understanding of the chronology, and Madam Jeffrey, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in August of 2018 is when there was a CSIS briefing.
Yeah, but
it
you're
was
not
in
answering the
September.
question,
It was in
Minister.
December of. It was in September of 2018 when the patent was discovered.
All right.
Yeah, that's not what I asked
We're
you,
out
though,
of time.
Minister.
I'm sorry, Dr. Ellis. Minister Holland, appreciate your appearance today. Our hour has gone on a little bit over. We will now suspend for a few minutes while we line up for the next panel. In the interest of time, shall we get back to work here and introduce our second panel? I'd now like to welcome David Vigneault, Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the following officials: Adam Fisher, Director General Litigation and Disclosure; Leonard Stern, Deputy Director General Security Screening. Mr. Vigneault, you have 5 minutes for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonsoir tout le monde. Monsieur le Président.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Chairperson, members of the committee, it's an honour to join you today and have the opportunity to contribute to your discussion on the matters revealed in the Winnipeg Lab documents, and more broadly on the importance of protecting Canada's research from foreign interference and espionage. My goal today is to provide some clarity on CSIS's role in protecting our research through its screening mandate, intelligence collection and advice, and stakeholder engagement. I'd also welcome the opportunity to provide clarity on CSIS's disclosure requirements and processes, and how we are working to maximise transparency while protecting sensitive information.
Well aware, Canada's research sector is often targeted by foreign threat actors seeking to advance their interests at our expense. This can take many forms, from covertly influencing research agendas or peer review processes, to engaging in funding arrangements where details about the source of funds can be obscured or misrepresented. Through deceptive partnerships and collaborations, vital research and novel intellectual property is stolen. The PRC is by far the greatest perpetrator of these activities. Needless to say, as state actors become more sophisticated, these threats become harder to identify and to counter. It is therefore imperative that Canadians work together. This effort begins with informed and transparent discussions among and within all levels and branches of government, as well as with communities, academia, and businesses. As a committed partner in this effort, CSIS continues to investigate, provide advice to the government, and where appropriate, take measures to reduce threats. This work includes close collaborations with other government departments. For example, CSIS leverages its unique tools and access to provide thorough security assessments to requesting departments on individuals who require access to classified Government of Canada information or sensitive sites. This is one of the tools used to protect Canada's research infrastructure against insider threats. Parmi les autres outils figurent.
Other tools include stakeholder engagement, which, through education and knowledge dissemination, builds resilience against foreign interference and espionage, and thus ensures that the government investments do not inadvertently advance the research of hostile states in sensitive areas. While, as an intelligence service, CSIS needs to be able to protect its own intelligence in order to fulfill its mandate, CSIS has also actively been taking measures to increase transparency with Canadians through increased public engagement with communities and institutions on national security issues. CSIS has briefed more than 200 organisations and 1,000 individuals across Canada who are now well informed about possible threats, which has provided them with the tools to protect themselves, their research and their employees. CSIS also exercises transparency through regular, proactive and responsive disclosures of information. In the case of the Winnipeg lab documents, CSIS worked collaboratively with the panel of arbiters to maximise transparency through sanitization, including by summarising certain redactions to provide unclassified information. This resulted in the publication of a greater amount of national security information than previously released. The remaining redactions were approved by the panel, who recognised that their release could be injurious to Canada's national security.
National security is not static, but rather evolves over time. With the passage of time, these assessments may change. This is why CSIS dedicates subject matter experts to review documents line by line, irrespective of their initial classification, to maximize transparency to Parliament and Canadians. The PRC has been bold in its attempts to threaten Canada's security, prosperity, and research through strategic espionage and foreign interference. To counter these threats, CSIS is continuously implementing lessons in how we respond to the constantly evolving threat environment. This includes increasing transparency with Canadians, and also through increased openness and willingness to release as much information as possible to processes such as this one. Finally, I will note that I cannot publicly comment on operational matters and requirements in order to protect the safety and security of Canadians. Nonetheless, I welcome this opportunity for a frank and transparent discussion to the extent possible and will be happy to answer your question. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Director Vigneault. I should note we are now rejoined by Ms. Landsman. Good to have you there on the screen. And for our first round of questioning, we'll go to Dr. Ellis again for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Specifically related to the National Microbiology Lab, is it true that in August of 2018, CSIS provided a briefing to National Microbiology Lab security officials?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. The CSIS, as part of its effort to make sure to increase resilience against threats posed by a number of foreign actors, we engage in proactive discussions with the Public Health Agency, including the National Microbiology Lab, about threats and indicators of insider threats. And so that was a very important and very useful discussion in 2018.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, to you again, Mr. Vigneault, I'm not sure how much you may or may not want to comment on this, but is it not true that the SDG of the National Microbiology Lab brought the names of two Chinese scientists forward to CSIS at that time?
My understanding, Mr. Chair, is that these discussions took place, a few weeks after that discussion, but it was generated by the initial discussion. So we received names of two individuals, the two individuals in question here. Yes.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, I'm not entirely sure, Mr. Vigneault, if you're quite aware of the timelines, but I'll ask you anyway. That would then lead us all to believe that there were concerns about Drs. Chu and Chang before the discovery of the two patents in China in the PRC registered under Dr. Chu's name. Is that true, sir?
Mr. Chair, my understanding is that, yes, there were some initial concerns that were brought forward by PIAC and the NML to CSIS. And as a result, we started further investigation. And it's as a result of those investigations that we discovered the information about the patent.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, is there any more information about the nature of the exact concerns that officials brought to CSIS back in August of 2018 with respect to Drs. Chu and Cheng?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any other details at this point, no.
Sir, through you, Chair, is that something that you could provide to the committee in writing?
Mr. Chair, I will absolutely endeavor to see what we can do. Of course, there will be limitations over what has already been disclosed through the process. But if there is more information that we can share, we will do so.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, to you, Mr. Vigneault, given the fact that I realize there are security concerns around this, but we had asked the minister previously about other security assessments or investigations ongoing with Thousand Talents program or Thousand Talents program like. I understand there's a new name for that program potentially for any scientist working at any government labs in Canada. Is there currently an investigation going on with respect to that?
So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned in my initial comments, there are limits of what I can disclose publicly. What I would, if it's helpful, what I could tell the member is that the Thousand Talent programs is something that we're keenly aware of, we're quite concerned with, and different iteration and different way that the PRC, or for that matter, other countries would try to use these types of programs is something that CSIS investigates fairly thoroughly, and we work with our international partners to better understand those dynamics. But unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to discuss more specific details.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, Mr. Vigneault, are you at liberty to say, is CSIS aware of any TTP-like scientists working in Canadian labs at the current time?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, my previous comments would apply to this question as well.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. You know, one of the things that we knew, the minister talked a lot about this, was that due process is more important than national security. Obviously, your lens perhaps is a little bit different, sir, than that of the minister. Do you share those comments?
Mr. Chair, I did not have the opportunity to listen to all of the minister's previous comments, but what I can tell you is that as an intelligence service, but working in a democratic environment governed by the rule of law, we are, of course, keenly focused, as per our mandate, to investigate all threats to national security, and we try to do that very thoroughly. But we also would be mindful that, you know, Canadians are entitled to due process and different procedures. So, in the case of a security screening assessment, our role is very clear: is we investigate and we provide advice to the requesting department, who are the owner of the decision at the end of the process.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I guess, sir, I might suggest things were a bit different. Things had evolved at the point of early in 2019 that this scientist's computer was actually mirrored, in my understanding, from the information we have in the briefing. Yet the institution, the National Microbiology Lab that scientist worked for, allowed a very deadly pathogen, probably two pathogens, Ebola and Henipavirus, to be transferred to a now existing national, a level 4 lab in the PRC, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Sir, in your assessment of threat and security, does that make any sense?
Well, Mr. Chair, I think, you know, the specific dynamic of when and how and under what authority those samples were transferred have been looked at by this committee, and I would argue that the members of this committee have more specific knowledge than CSIS on the very aspect of that. But what I can tell you is that this is an area of great concern for CSIS, that when we see any way that directly, indirectly, covertly or not, that we see the PRC being able to potentially increase their threat activity against Canada and against other Western nations and their neighbors. So that's the prism through which we look at these issues at CSIS.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. That's your time. We'll go down to Mr. Franciscatos for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. Mr. Vigneault, to what extent can we say that every democracy is dealing with these kinds of issues in some shape or form? That is, the implications for national security when we look at issues of research and research collaboration.
So, Mr. Chair, I will use a very specific example to illustrate that point. My colleagues and I, heads of the Five Eyes Intelligence Services, we took the unprecedented avenue of meeting together in public for the first time in our history in October of last year at Stanford University in the context of talking about innovation and the need to secure that innovation for the well-being and the prosperity and the security of our countries in the future. And we had a common assessment, the head of the Five Eyes, that specifically the work of the PRC against all of us, against essentially any organization that has information of know-how that the PRC is interested in, is at risk, because it is an institutional approach through the talent programs, through covert espionage activities, through open arrangements and investments to try to get as much information. The problem, again, is not to do that what is done in overt way is not the problem. However, in the case of the PRC, there is a very specific set of conditions that apply. And the Chinese Communist Party has been very clear that their goal is to have, for example, the most advanced and modern military by 2049. And in order to do so, the president of China, Xi Jinping, who is also the general secretary of the Communist Party, chairs a committee of military civil fusion. So all of the information, know-how, and data that they acquire, there is an institutional approach to try to leverage this and turn this into a military advantage. And so from that point of view, Mr. Franciscatos, you're right to say that it's not just Canada that is under threat, but, any other country that, has something that the PRC in this case is interested in acquiring.
Thank you very much. What would you say is the message to post-secondary institutions? I represent London, Ontario, or help to represent London, Ontario in the House of Commons. Western University is there in London. We have universities throughout the country that look at medical research, look at research in general, and collaboration is key to that research in so many different cases. What is the message that is being relayed either through the Five Eyes more generally, but also what would you say here to universities who look at situations like this and wonder about the security implications for research?
So, Mr. Chair, this is one of the area that we have to be very careful about how we engage in these discussions. Canada is a prosperous country because we have excellent know-how, universities, and research, and this is the basis for our prosperity. And so we have to be careful not to stifle that innovation, because we will not be where we need to be in 10, 15, 20 years. And so that innovation needs to be protected. However, the world has changed, and the number of actors also have changed in the process, and the way they are engaging in these activities has evolved to the point where some of these activities are indeed threats to our country. And so one of the most important ways specifically to work with university is to engage in open dialogue, is to share information with them. We have published unclassified documents that are going at the core of this. In the past year, we have engaged directly, visited 13 universities across the country, and we are part of organizations called, we work with the research university in the country, and we work with Universities Canada to share our information, meet with academia, with students' body, with academic administrators, to essentially share with them what we know, share with them the concerns that we may have, and work in collaboration to accomplish these two objectives: great innovation in our universities, but protecting our national security at the same time. Both need to be achieved.
And you said, beyond universities now, you said that there were around 200 organizations that CSIS has briefed. What kinds of organizations are we looking at here? What is the nature of those briefings? The reason I ask that question is I wonder if there's particular sectors that you're worried about that are more susceptible to threats.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, indeed, there are a number of specific sectors we're more concerned with. Quantum technology, biopharma, aviation. We're looking at anything related to cyber. Our agriculture is of area of concern because we're developing very innovative approaches in our country. And so we're meeting with universities, as I mentioned. We're also meeting with industry associations. We're publishing unclassified documentations and try to make them as available to possible. If it's of interest, I can say that we're also working, because we've been talking about foreign interference, and that is one part of the element of the same kind of approach by the PRC. Espionage and foreign interference often go, or two elements of the same strategy. And so we've been engaging very significantly with the diaspora in the country to make sure that we are seen as part of the solution with the diaspora, that we share our information, we listen to their concerns, we listen to how we can better interact with them, what will be relevant. And I would say that work of this committee also are very important, because it increasing the knowledge and the know-how of what or the know-how that we have that we can share through you, and it's through these different efforts that will increase the resilience of Canada and Canadians.
Thank you, Director. We'll now go to Mr. Bergeron. Next 6 minutes are yours. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us here today. It's really highly appreciated, your attendance here. So a couple of moments ago, I mentioned an article released in the Journal de Montréal on the 29th of January 2024, which stated that as of 2010, you alerted the government regarding an increasingly aggressive attitude on the part of China concerning intelligence activities. Now, what we've observed is that the government was slow to react and to cotton on to this message. The minister even said to us a couple of moments ago that up until recently, the government of Canada relied on voluntary disclosures by employees to get a very clear idea of their quote-unquote pedigree and any ties they might have had with other institutions. Now, of course, I don't want to embarrass you, or put you on the spot, but is it your opinion that the government should have put in place verification, background screening measures earlier on when it comes to high-level laboratories and facilities, level 4 facilities such as the Winnipeg lab? Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. Your question is very interesting and addresses a number of key issues. Now, one of those issues is this: how things have evolved over recent years, specifically since Xi Jinping came into power, and how China has evolved over time in terms of how aggressive it is and how it flouts international law. For example, the 2015-2016 decision of the International Penal Court on the South China Sea, where a unequivocal decision was handed down, and China decided to ride roughshod over it. So that was one of the triggers in 2015, for example. This speaks to a very deliberate trajectory on the part of the Chinese government, and Chinese legislation has also evolved over time. For example, the 1,000 Talents program has become highly institutionalized. There's legislation that's been enacted. In some ways, it paints China as quite open. In 2015, 2016, some legislation forces Chinese worldwide to collaborate with their intelligence services. And another example, the development and growth of the United Front work. I'm sorry, the acronym in French escapes me, but it's the UFW. And they attempt to influence and control the Chinese diaspora worldwide and to wield influence over other countries in order to promote Chinese interests. So the UFW and the 1,000 Talents programs and the evolution of the threat posed by China, all of this must be factored in to what we do as an intelligence agency vis-a-vis China. And that is why it's important to look at the information we have in 2024, look at it through the lens of 2010, and look back retrospectively and try and determine what we could have done at the time. That's a helpful exercise. And a final observation, Mr. Bergeron, given my collaborative work with my counterparts across the world concerning Chinese espionage and foreign interference, all players have evolved over the past years in terms of their assessment of that kind of behaviour, and I know that Canada has been part and parcel of that development too. When you testified before the committee in March 2021 and you spoke about the relationship between your institution and universities, you mentioned that CSIS has a close dialogue with the universities and academia, and you'd like heightened collaboration. In March 2024, Radio-Canada CBC observed that Saskatchewan University will host the first non-government level 4 laboratory in Canada. Now, in light of your agency's limitations when it comes to information sharing, how do you intend to collaborate with such a high-level laboratory that is not the purview of the Government of Canada? Response. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. It's, again, a very good question, and Mr. Bergeron is alluding to the limitations of the CSIS Act when it comes to information sharing. Now, the Minister of Public Safety, Minister Leblanc, observed that there are consultations that have taken place in Canada, but he would be willing to move amendments to the legislation itself, he has indicated, and we'd like to see that happen because this is one of the shortcomings of our system. And when it comes to the lab in Winnipeg, I can tell you that we've had discussions over quite a protracted period to talk about information sharing and about broadening awareness. So within the limitations that are imposed upon us under the Act, we are striving to, and we were able to enter into a dialogue with academia, and we indeed hope to enhance that already existing dialogue. Thank you very much.
We'll now go to Mr. Desjardins for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being present today, and of course, for your immense work in keeping Canadians safe and all the work that your staff does to ensure that our continued work to make it safer continues, which is why we're all here today. And so it's a question I want to ask, and similar to what Mr. Frederick was mentioned in terms of the sectors that are under threat. I know coming from Alberta, this has been a conversation we've had for a long time, particularly with the development of our oil sands. In Alberta oil sands, as you may know, in 2012 and even previous to that, there was an economic policy by the then Conservative Party to find ways to sell off assets in Alberta, particularly our access to oil sand projects. CNRL, Canadian Natural Resources, was unfortunately sold to Nexen. Nexen was sold to controlled companies by China, and today that's the same. How much of a threat is China and the People's Republic, the PRC, to our oil sands and to the production development of research for those petroleum products?
Mr. Chair, this is the question is interesting because what you're looking at is two things. One is the control and ownership of a fixed asset, if you want. But also, you meant your question. You talk about the development of the know-how and new innovation. So I would make the distinction between something that you can control, which is the asset. Like you cannot in the middle of the night come in covertly and take it over. So I think all of the knowing and understanding, not just the PRC but other countries as well, what their intent is to have the right legislation to make sure that they're able to protect through the Investment Canada Act, amongst other things. But the very important question as well is, the development of the know-how, the innovation. When you look at some of the carbon capture, there is very innovative things happening in Alberta and other parts of the country. And so what we know is that if it's of interest or of the PRC or some other countries as well, there will be an ability to try to overtly, sometimes through direct engagement, but also through other means, including covert espionage, to try to acquire this know-how and this information. And what we have to be very mindful of, and this is what we do at CSIS, is to try to look at it, the very specific activities, but also to zoom out and to try to understand what is the cumulative impact of some of these issues and see what is the consequence for Canada's national security now, but also in the future. And this is the advice we try to provide the government.
No, that's a fantastic answer. Just to be able to frame that, at the time of these policies being in existence, I would assume that they were existing in 2012 when China took over Alberta's oil companies, correct?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, what we've seen is, some of these conditions existed, but, since 2012 to 2024, there's been a very significant evolution, and there's been a couple of pivotal moments, and one of them has been the ascension to power of Xi Jinping, but also a number of other steps that have been taken, including the publication of very specific strategies like Made in China 2025, and their 5-year goals, strategies, which sometimes very overt. They say this is where we want to be. We want to dominate this sector, that sector. And so I think that evolution that we've seen, since 2013, some of these elements were there, some of these dynamics were there in 2012, but we've seen a dramatic acceleration.
I can see that, and I hope you can see my curiosity and the very problematic connection that comes to mind when I think of the control of Alberta's oil assets and petroleum, which is, an immense resource we have here in Canada, but particularly in Alberta. But to also know that your concern of issuing the potential of, especially we're looking at the PRC's mandate to have the strongest, most technologically advanced military by 2049, I believe you said. Those two things, in my mind, present a credible risk. That if they have control over physical resource assets like petroleum, an incredibly important asset to war and military, that they would also then have access to the information that supplies it. Do you believe that the ownership of these companies should be challenged, especially now in light of what we're seeing in terms of a very aggressive modes of information and hostile actions?
Mr. Chair, that's the question I honestly will have to reflect upon in the last number of years. The specific ownership of those resources has not been as much top of our agenda. We'll reflect on this, Mr. Desjardins, and maybe be able to bring back something more intelligent to share with you.
No, I would appreciate that, and look forward to hearing from that. Maybe you can supply that in writing at a certain time to this committee when it's appropriate for you to review that information and supply an opinion or response. I understand I have 30 seconds, so I want to be able to ask a question that I asked the minister in relation to impacts of this study and other studies related to the Winnipeg Labs, of our relationship with our partners across the globe, particularly Five Eyes and NATO, whether or not that serious breach of information presented a credible risk by our partners, and did they present that risk to you as a question or in ways of recommending ways to partner to reduce that risk?
So, Mr. Chair, as I mentioned, we're working extremely closely with not just our Five Eyes partners, but a number of other extremely sophisticated intelligence services around the world. CSIS has over 300 relationships around the world with intelligence services. And this is one of the very significant issues we're talking about. Each country has challenges when it comes to penetration of institutions and espionage activities. And this is one of the reasons why we share so much at the classified level together, is to collectively be more resilient, learn from each other, including, you can be sure that, a case like this, the lessons that we will learn as an intelligence service, we will be sharing that with our partners to make sure, again, that, we raise the bar and that we make it harder for hostile actors to threaten our well-being.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Director Vigneault. We'll now go to Mr. Chong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CSIS has assessed that foreign interference from the PRC is a serious threat to Canada. I just want to quote what CSIS has assessed. Quote, "Foreign interference is one of the most important strategic threat to Canada's national security. It poses a significant threat to the integrity of our democratic institutions, social cohesion, economy and long-term prosperity, and fundamental rights and freedoms," end quote. Now, you mentioned earlier in your testimony that that espionage is not exactly the same thing as foreign interference, but it's very closely related. How do you assess the PRC's espionage activities in Canada in terms of threat?
So, Mr. Chair, because of the organized, systematic approach and capabilities of the PRC, we assess that the PRC is the most significant espionage threat against our country. As I mentioned, and some of that is, Mr. Chong will know that is, it's the dynamic is somewhat similar to the foreign interference in the sense that you have a continuum of activities, because so the intent is very clear. And one of them, for example, is to have the most sophisticated modern military in 2049. It's to have through these 5-year programs to have very dominate certain aspect of the economy in the future. And so the intent is very clear. The means can vary from the overt to the very much covert. And so the dynamic that we see in terms of foreign interference, we see the same thing. We see legitimate means of engaging in our economy that are absolutely appropriate. And I've talked to different companies who are essentially telling us that they know that when they get into some deals that they will lose intellectual property, very sophisticated, up to and including very covert espionage.
Thank you for that answer. You mentioned earlier in your testimony that CSIS is concerned with the Thousand Talents program. How do you assess the Thousand Talents program with respect to government scientists? In other words, do you think it is appropriate for Government of Canada scientists to participate in the Thousand Talents program or any of the 200 or so other recruitment programs of the People's Republic of China?
So, Mr. Chair, I will reiterate what I said earlier in the sense that we, in these types of cases, we do an assessment of the generic nature of those talent programs. That's one thing. And then at the request of agencies, we will do the screening of very specific individuals. And then we provide that assessment, that advice to the host agency for them to determine. And I think it's the reason I reiterate this point, Mr. Chong, is that there might be some circumstances in which, it is totally transparent. It is an activity that would benefit Canada as well as, in this case, China. So there might be some cases, and so I would not want to be categorical to say 100%
Understood.
no.
So it could be appropriate in some cases and not in others.
But very transparent, and that is one of the key issue at play.
Understood. Now, we know that Dr. Chu clandestinely and corruptly cooperated and collaborated with the government and the military of the People's Republic of China, and also received payment for travel within the People's Republic of China from both of those entities, and did not declare that with the Government of Canada. One of those entities that she clandestinely collaborated with was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is not on the list of named research organizations of the Government of Canada, so it is technically possible for a government entity to collaborate with that organization. Do you assess that to be an acceptable security risk, particularly in light of the fact that, according to public sourced reports, Dr. Chu is working at the Wuhan Institute of Virology or working with scientists there as we presently speak?
Mr. Chair, I would say that the list of entities that are, have been listed by the government as problematic is a very welcome approach, because again, it speaks to Mr. Fragiskatos here when you asked this question earlier about how do we work with people. Giving them more information about what might be appropriate or not is very important. And in this case, listing these organizations and telling them why it might be a problem helps people make their own decisions. So I think, we CSIS have provided advice to ICED and public safety, who have come up with that list. In the specific case of the Wuhan Institute, again, there might be legitimate reasons why, for the benefit of Canada, that would be appropriate to work with them. And so I think it would be useful in this case, if there were to be any kind of such arrangement, to ask specifically what kind of due diligence has been made on these.
Just a very quick
Mr.
final.
Chung, I'm sorry, sir, you're out of time. You are out of time. We'll have to go now to Mr. Erskine-Smith for 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair. As the director of CSIS, you are one of the people in this country who thinks about national security more than most. And so when you look at the timeline, you reflect on the timeline here, there have been accusations of delay and inappropriate due diligence. And so as of August, there's a lab employee who identifies 2 colleagues who might be targeted by the PRC. September 2018, PHAC, through some due diligence, becomes aware of a patent filed by Dr. Chu. You've got later that year, December 2018, security consultant is engaging in a fact-finding and ultimately reports to PHAC in March of 2019. The RCMP escorts the individuals out of the lab in July of 2019. When you reflect on that timeline, do you think PHAC acted with appropriate due diligence?
Mr. Chair, I think that this chronology is very instructive, because now with what we know in 2024, it's easy to look back at the events of the day and try to, with the knowledge that we have. I was talking to my colleagues who are responsible for the screening branch earlier today. We're looking at those dates and so on, and my experts were telling me that as far as the case go, this one was very quick to be able to come to fruition. And one of the way, because I know there were some questions about due diligence and due process, but one of the things that is important is how do you start to mitigate the threat significantly. And so when these individuals were walked out and not having access to their information and the lab itself, this is one way you mitigate the threat while the rest of the investigation takes place. So I will reiterate, Mr. Smith, that my expert colleagues have told me that they thought it was a fairly expeditious process.
I appreciate that. In your view, from a security vantage point, what more could PHAC have done? And I know because these individuals, I mean, we're talking about their employees from the early 2000s. This is not an infiltration operation. This is an operation where they are ultimately co-opted down the road of their careers, which strikes me as a more challenging thing to screen, all things considered. But I wonder what your view is as the director of CSIS. What more could and should PHAC have done in the circumstances to mitigate the risks that ultimately were realized?
Mr. Chair, the answer to the way I would try to answer this question is to say that, of course, as Mr. Erskine-Smith mentioned, we look at the issues, through a national security prism. And so one of the effort we try to do is to, share our knowledge, our expertise, and our concerns with our colleagues to make sure that they are looking, that one of the filter at which they look at issues within the organization is the national security aspect. And so increasing the culture of these organizations, the security culture of these organizations is one thing that, we're very keen in doing. And so it is more a generic comment as opposed to a specific one looking back at times that any organization that, we can work with more closely to increase what I would refer to as a connective tissue between national security and their business, I think makes CADA and these organizations more resilient.
Can you pause that? That's a very good answer, because I was amazed, actually. I read the April 2020 security assessment, the first security assessment, and it's pretty thin because there's an interview. Dr. Chu lies straight up to your officials. And then mere months later, June 30th, there's a second security assessment. It's incredible what your agency was able to glean and document in between those a mere matter of months. And that close, especially at a level 4 lab, that close relationship between CSIS and a level 4 lab is essential, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair, absolutely. As I mentioned, the evolution of the threat activity of the PRC and others, other countries against Canada has been such that we had to change our approach at CSIS. We have to be both collecting very covertly intelligence and secrets that the government, the parliament essentially to the CSIS Act is asking us to do. But then at the same time is we need to increase our transparency because the ecosystem in Canada has changed because of those threat actors. And so when you look, Mr. Erskine-Smith, at the dynamic in the lab at the time, the dynamic with the organization, I think what you see is a both realization of that threat, but also a number of people who started to be tweaking to security issues much more significantly. And that's what, again, I commend the work of this committee because I think, through this work, more Canadians will be thinking about these issues. And this is the only way through more transparency that will increase our resiliency. I would say that...
Sorry,
I'm running out of time, so 2 questions.
Sorry, Mr. Yeah, I know, but time's up. Sorry, it goes by very
quickly. Time's up. All right. Well, thanks.
Time's up. Mr. Bergeron, 2.5 minutes for you, sir.
Alors, 2 questions. 2 questions right off the bat, Mr. Chair. Now, if CSIS thinks that a high-level researcher in Canada is a member of the 1,000 Talents program, will it intervene? And what about in 2018? The lab was supposed to have cutting-edge technology that would be protected from that kind of threat or intrusion over a 25-year trajectory. Do you think that you could achieve that more quickly? Mr. Chairperson, about the 25-year trajectory, I'm not aware of the details of that strategy. What I do understand of the government's strategy, however, is that this will be taking place over a number of years. But, of course, we try to manage the biggest threats proactively. Your first question about the 1,000 Talents program, are we aware of high-level researchers that are part of that program? Response, yes, Mr. Chairperson. Yes, sometimes our screening program or our intelligence colleagues become aware of that kind of involvement. And were we aware of an individual being part of the 1,000 Talents program, either from China or another country, yes, we would intervene, certainly. Thank you.
Mr. Bergeron, I still have you down for a minute.
Il me reste 1 minute. Mon Dieu.
Oh, I have a minute left. My gosh, how luxurious. Well,
c'est ça, mais je...
Indeed, Mr. Chairperson. Well, we learned that one of the things that the researchers, or the 2 researchers, was criticised over was the fact that they had collaborators work in the lab without any escort. How did that actually occur? And in your opinion, is that commonplace, that kind of practice, or has it been tightened up since then? response. To my knowledge, Mr. Chairperson, lessons have been learned, and our PHAC colleagues have very aggressively implemented those lessons with a view to plugging those gaps when it comes to security. And to my knowledge, those practices are no longer commonplace. What I can tell you, however, is that espionage and counter-espionage is such that as our techniques and intelligence gathering strategies are developed and become efficient and effective, well then our opponents and adversaries will tweak their strategies in response. So it's kind of like the cat and the mouse, and we can't rest on our laurels and think, oh, well, this is done and dusted and we can move on. That's why I always emphasize the importance of a partnership and dialogue between national security experts, such as CSIS, and other organizations, because things evolve, the techniques, the strategies, espionage techniques evolve too, and we need to keep the pace.
2.5 minutes for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to now turn to what I believe to be like an overarching concern related to China, which is the potential of China organizing global allies towards such ends. And I know the mandate of this committee is more narrowly specific to China, but my concern is largely on how China could be leveraging its state supporters to meet the ends that you described at the very onset of our meeting today. The greatest potential and the greatest risk I perceive from your comments of today's meeting is this plan towards a larger military, which, of course, in New Democrats' perspective is bad for peace. Of course, when you have larger and larger militaries continuing to gather, it makes an inevitable situation likely. And so it's a major concern, I think, not just for Canadians, but for the globe writ large. How concerning is China's relationship with other state actors towards what could be a really serious potential collision course with NATO and our allies?
Mr. Chair, one of the significant byproduct, if you want, of Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been a rapprochement between the People's Republic of China and Russia. We're talking about two dictatorship. We're talking about two system that authoritarian system that they collaborate because they see an interest in doing so for each one of them, and so the dynamic of an increased military collaboration between the PRC and Russia is of concern. We see also a rapprochement with North Korea. And so when you start to look at the security dynamics in that part of the world, we start to see a number of indicators going in the wrong direction. For Canada specifically, we see the PRC has declared itself and invented a new concept. They declared themselves a near Arctic state. Did not exist before, but now it exists at least in their nomenclature, and it's for the specific purpose of trying to increase their capabilities of operating in the north, including the Canadian Arctic. They see the economic potential with climate change and the opening of sea routes in the north, but also as a military component of this. So from a Canadian point of view, we are concerned about specifically using this example of what is a potential direct impact on Canada's security now and in the future, but also, as you mentioned, Mr. Desjardins, the question of the global stability or instability that is created by military arrangements, sharing of know-how, sharing of equipment. In that part of the world. So it is of a significant concern now, but also in the future.
Thank you, Director.
Both. Now we're going to take care of our final 2 5-minute periods. So it'll be Mr. Chong first, and then Mr. Naqvi to wrap us up. Mr. Chong.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Government of Canada outsources and contracts to a lot of outside individuals and companies. ArriveCan obviously has been in the news recently. But one of the things that surprised me in reading the documents we received was that a private company did some parts of the investigation. why is a private company, in this case Presidia Security Consulting, doing security investigations for the Government of Canada? What is your view of that? And secondly, what is the relationship between CSIS and this private company in respect of these investigations?
So, Mr. Chair, I think it's an interesting point in the sense that some organizations may have more in-house capabilities to be able to do some of these sophisticated investigations. In this case, I would suggest that, Mr. Chung, I don't know if you've had the chance to ask a question to PIAC, why did they do that? But in my experience, that has been one of the issues, that people do not have enough expertise in some specific area. But I'm speaking in a general manner here, I don't know. There is no relationship between CSIS and such an organization. For the simple purpose of that, there's nothing we can share with them. We would not be sharing our techniques and methods and our information with them. I would say that, again, at the general level, there might be, again, scenarios in which it could be useful. We have some private companies who have a lot of very good expertise in niche area of investigation, so that might be useful. But that will, of course, need to be complemented, especially if you're talking about government assets, government information, with a government investigation, and this is where CSIS would have to come into play. And, of course, in the context of potential criminality, our colleagues at the RCMP need to be engaged.
So, in other words, the department and the agency is responsible for carrying out the investigation with their own resources, and if they don't have them, then, that's why they contracted a private company to do it. Is that, I would have thought that if there was a security concern within PIAC, that they would have contacted Government of Canada authorities to conduct the investigation, such as CSIS, the RCMP, rather than hiring a private contractor to do the investigative work to gather the information.
So, Mr. Chair, our mandate at CSIS, is fairly clear in this circumstance. We would be investigating the national security threat, and we would be doing the security screening aspect of it. But everything that in between those arcs, with the administrative portion of it, we would not be equipped to do so, and that would not be appropriate. And again, I just want to reiterate, I was making a general comment when I said that, so I don't know if the rationale for PIAC.
Okay, so I have another related question. So CSIS does intelligence assessments. So if an individual wants to get clearance to go into the Winnipeg lab, CSIS will do the intelligence assessment on that individual and provide advice to the department or agency. Normally, within the machinery of Government of Canada, who is responsible for granting that security clearance? Is it the Deputy Minister or head of the agency, such as the President of PIAC, or who is it normally? And can those authorities be delegated?
So, Mr. Chair, the authority clearly through the government security screening policy, the authority rests with the deputy head of each organization.
The deputy head.
The deputy head of each organization. In terms of delegation of authority, I believe it is possible.
So in the case of PIAC, the authority which is responsible for the NML, it would be the president of PIAC that would be responsible for granting the security clearance.
Mr. Chair, the authority is indeed through the president or to the deputy head. Same thing with revocation.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And so my last question concerns a report. There's basically one level 4 lab in Canada. I know there's two parts of it. There's the animal side of it and there's the human side of it. But essentially, there is one level 4 facility in Canada in Winnipeg. One run by CFIA, the other run by PIAC. It's been reported last month that the University of Saskatchewan is interested in setting up a level 4 lab. So I have a very simple question. Do we have the state capacity in Canada to have another level 4 lab, particularly at a non-governmental institution, in light of the massive security breaches that we saw at the government's lab in Winnipeg.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll be very transparent here with member. This is not an issue where we CSIS have looked at it. I have not personally looked at the capacity the way you refer to it, Mr. Chong. What I can say is that in answering Mr. Bergeron's question, I mentioned that we do have already connections and engagement with the Saskatchewan entity that is looking to establish that. And I think, again, the work of this committee, if there's one thing that will come out of this, is that everybody will be even more aware and concerned, and I would expect diligent in their in the setting up and the security aspect of any such a lab.
So you think we should,
Mr. Chong, sorry, you are way out of time.
thank you.
All right, to Mr. Naqvi for 5 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you, Director, and Mr. Stern and Mr. Fisher for being here. Director, you spoke about the processes that went into in 2018, 2019, and it's your testimony that looking back, you feel that the matter was dealt with in a fairly expeditious manner. I want to ask you a question looking forward. Having seen this process and changing climate around safety and security as it relates to PRC, what would be your thoughts in terms of things that needs to happen to improve the processes around a lab 4 and other government apparatus that may deal with other foreign countries?
Mr. Chair, I think what we realize is that the dynamic in our countries have been changing for some time. There are a number of threat actors, fortunately, who are after what we have. They want what we have here, our know-how, our expertise, and our intellectual property. So I think, as I mentioned before, there's a number of different elements. One is you need to talk about these issues. You need to have, it cannot just be, in the confines of CSIS that, these issues are of concern. It should be part of a societal discussion that, unfortunately there are threats to our national security, and we need to talk about these. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is to make sure you create the right, to use the expression I used before, connective tissue between different organizations. People need to know each other a little bit. People need to have confidence that, if I have a concern, where do I go to? How do I engage in these discussions? Because we definitely do not have all of the answers. We do not know everything at CSIS. I'd like to think we know a few things. But at the same time, we need to have ourselves, but with many other federal government entities, but provincial, municipal, academic or institutions, research laboratories. We need to have areas where people will talk to each other. And so the last number of years, I've seen an increase in the number of those venues, organized venues, formal and informal, for the information exchange. And the last thing I would say is, as we say in French, je vais prêcher pour ma paroisse. It's important to make sure that the organizations dedicated to protecting national security have adequate capacity to do that, including through legislation.
So thank you. So my last question to you would be sort of encapsulating sort of those general themes that you just spoke about that should be kept in mind moving forward. Are there specific recommendations around improvement to rules and processes that you can provide as CSIS to this committee in writing that can help us in our report writing also in terms of what we saw and how we can improve things moving forward?
Mr. Chair, through you, I welcome the opportunity. I'll work with my colleagues, and we'll endeavor to provide some of our thoughts and potentially even be bold, advice to the committee.
Okay. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Naqvi. That brings us to the close. We want to appreciate all of the questions and certainly our witnesses, Mr. Stern, Mr. Vigneault, and Mr. Fisher. I want to thank the clerk, the analysts, our interpreters, staff, and service staff. And with that, the session is adjourned.
Just
a quick point.
Yes, just a point of order. I noticed we're meeting Friday afternoon.
Yes, we are.
I also was told today that the only Wednesday slot available is 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. So I'm wondering if you just quickly canvass the members of the committee whether they want to meet on Friday afternoon or Wednesday evening. I'm agnostic, realizing it's actually quite a late Wednesday slot. I thought it was earlier in the day. So we just
Okay.
quickly canvass.
Let's, can we actually have the clerk follow up with everybody
Sure.
and get everybody's thoughts and feelings on that?
Sure,
We'll
that's
go with, we'll certainly go with Friday this week.
Okay.
And, you know, of course,
Sure.
we'll
See about
accede
next
to
week.
the wishes of the committee, even though it is, you know, Wednesday evening would be a horrible imposition on your chair.
No.
You know, I mean, I don't want to play, you know, the big victim here, but.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
But we'll
Chair.
leave that to your conscience, sir. All right? With that, meeting adjourned.